new percent. Well, you spoke to the right.
Just real quick. If I'm not mistaken, I read something to the effect that one of the western states had voted against the right to work proposal or law.
It was Missouri.
Missouri, that's what I was thought. I didn't want to say they wanted to be wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I think 2-1. I believe it was a referendum on the ballot. 2-1. It was very exciting.
And knowing that knowing that it's not politically correct to back a loser, but would you be willing to put some type of legislation together or make an attempt to do the same thing in Virginia?
Well, it's a little different because Virginia is already a right-to-work state. It has been for a long time. So it would be harder than what Missouri did, which was to stop them from becoming a right-to-work state.
I realize that.
Yeah. But so would I be willing to back a loser? I've backed a lot of losers in my day. Not as a politician, but just as kind of a community activist and an entrepreneur. So yeah, I'd be willing to try to, what I would try to do is build a coalition around workers, around what's happening in our region, like the school teachers in West Virginia and Oklahoma, like some of the other resurgence of union. I think it'd be pointless to try to introduce a piece of legislation like in 2019. But if we start building that coalition of workers, we start tackling the arguments that right to work is better for workers when we know that the evidence shows it's not. We'll have to build the case, and it might take 6 or 8 years, but I think it's worth the fight. And for sure, in the meantime, I'd fight like heck against a national right-to-work law, which this administration doesn't want. I'd fight that like crazy.
So, ERISA was a wonderful act in its time for protection of pensions and health care plans. Have you seen the latest news on Sears Corporation?
I've not.
So it has been reported multiple times in the last couple days that they think now that it's not Amazon, they think now that it's not Walmart that is really hurting them. They're going the way of the automakers and the mine workers. They think that their pension plan is killing their ability to function as a company. So since that was put in place, we all know that a lot of corporate boards' pay has not increased 15%, but about 1,500%. And so a lot of pension monies has been paid in wages to CEOs and board directors. Any chance that looking at ERISA and trying to update it, because obviously they're headed to the courts to say, they're not going to talk about the 1,500% pay raise that they have received that has taken a lot of money away from the pension plans. They're going to talk about the fact that now they can't afford to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the direction they're moving in. And again, I believe that this administration, through the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and everything else, will not fight to preserve pensions. So what do we do about that? Well, it reminds me, and I talked about this just in Norton last week, it's just like the filing that Alpha did when it declared bankruptcy. It's much smaller than Sears, but side by side they had, we can't afford the pensions on the 4,400 workers on our force. As part of our bankruptcy, the judge needs to allow us to eliminate those pensions. And, by the way, we want up to $17 million for the 15 top executives to reward them for their hard work. That's like a microcosm of the way the whole debate is playing out nationally, as CEO salaries continue to rise and workers struggle. What do? Well, I think at a minimum, we can require that any large company that has any sort of public contracting, so now Sears may not fall into this, but an awful lot of our bigger corporations bid on public contracts, whether for construction and infrastructure, whether related to the military, whether related to aerospace. A lot of them have a lot of fingers in the state and federal pots. And I think we ought to have at that point some sort of a policy that pensions, for them to do that, pensions are absolutely guaranteed. if they promise severance pay as part of layoffs and those kinds of things, that's absolutely guaranteed. I think any private sector employer that is bidding on public jobs and has public jobs should be held to a very high standard. For those that aren't aren't bidding on or part of that, or they're purely private sector, purely retail, it would be a little bit of a different solution. Some people on the left are talking about the idea of a maximum wage, that people ought not to be able to earn above a certain level. I don't think that's going to fly in this country, but I do think there's a way to somehow, a carrot and stick approach, so that the CEO and the top executive salaries never get more than some proportion higher than the average worker, whether it's 25 to 1, 30 to 1. It was just a generation ago when the difference was about 25 to 1 between the CEOs and the average workers on the floor of the facility. And now it's 330 or whatever it is. So I don't know exactly what it is, but I know we're going in the wrong direction, and we ought to be able to start with those companies that have their fingers in the federal pot, and ensure that they, as a condition of doing business with the federal government, that they guarantee those pensions, as spelled out in perpetuity. Yes?
I'd like to know what your stance is on Social Security, because we've heard that the government started off as a savings plan and it was never supposed to be touched, and then it got dipped into, and now, the generation that I'm looking now, it's going to be for my children.
Right.
It's generation 4, what we're using. So, when you're younger, you don't think about it. And now when you get to an age to where I may have to use it, a lot of people on disability that need it, seniors that need it, live on. So, would you be willing to start a legislation where that's not touched? Would you be in favor of that, or would you be in favor of borrowing money to pay something else? What is your stance on that?
There's two big things that would help fund Social Security. And by the way, I think we shouldn't be shrinking benefits. I think that benefits should actually be decreasing faster than the COLA, the cost of living allowance. Because right now, I mean, certainly there's people who have great jobs and have a great pension, and Social Security is like just playground. But for a big chunk of Americans, Social Security is pretty much it. And it's all but impossible to live off of it in most of the country. So I think we should actually be expanding Social Security benefits, not shrinking them. So how would we do that? One is, yes, it should be completely impossible for Congress or the executive branch to borrow from Social Security. It was set up, as Al Gore infamously said, it was supposed to be a locked box. You're not supposed to be able to get in. And they have dipped into it. And if you talk to some people, they'll say, well, no, the money's there. It's just an IOU. But what exactly is backing that IOU at this point? As our deficits get bigger and bigger and our tax base shrinks, where exactly is the money to back up that IOU? So yes, one piece of legislation would absolutely and completely prohibit it. The second one's at least as important. It's eliminating the payroll tax cap. Because that's our biggest problem now, is that people, well-to-do people, don't pay into the Social Security Trust Fund at all on the vast majority of their income. We all pay into it. Every dollar we make, roughly 6 cents of that goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. But when you hit $128,000 a year of income, you stop paying it. You don't pay less, you pay zero at that point. Zero. So that means that millionaires are paying only on like a couple of weeks or a month's worth of their wages, and the rest of the year they're paying nothing into Social Security. If we eliminated the payroll tax cap, or at least raised it dramatically, it would be a tremendous flow of funds into the Social Security Trust Fund. And we could stop talking about all the other schemes of raising the retirement age, of cutting the benefits, of privatizing portions of it. So those two steps is what I would fight for. And I think they're both no-brainers. I think a lot of the public hates the idea that Social Security was stolen from them. Most people know that. A lot of people don't know that the wealthy stopped paying into Social Security at that level. And that there's billions of dollars of lost revenue into the trust fund every year. And I think if people knew it, which I talk about it everywhere I go, I think we could get a groundswell to say, hey, let's lift that cap.
So that's hard to get passed because a lot of people that are making over $120,000 as congressmen are making over that amount. That bill's going to be hard to get passed. So what would you do to fight for that bill?
Well, like everything else, I mean, most sensible legislation and certainly most progressive legislation that's going to benefit everyday people and workers and small businesses and family farms over corporate giants, every one of those is going to be hard to get passed. Because we got too many rich and powerful people in Congress catering to the rich and powerful. So these things are not going to happen overnight. But the way you do it is you keep building a groundswell of people that are going to fight for it. I mean, look at Medicare for All. Again, there's still people who think that's flat-out socialism and would fight it. But in the 9th District, in the poll we did, 58% of people said they would support Medicare for All. Only 37% would oppose it. Those numbers would have been very different 8 or 10 years ago, before Bernie Sanders and others kind of build a basis. We'll have to do the same thing with Social Security. We'll have to, I mean, I hope to not only come back to the 9th and do town halls, I hope to take busloads of people up to Washington to testify on these things, to push it. Because working people and everyday people are going to have to hold our feet to the fire. That's the way that stuff happens. It doesn't happen without a fight. But it's a pretty, it's not a complicated argument, that particular one. Some of them, you get into issues, it's really pretty complicated to figure it out. This one's pretty easy. All working people pay into Social Security on every dollar they make. The wealthy don't. How is that fair? It's a simple argument. It's a clear argument. I think it's one we could build support for. And by the way, the other piece of legislation I'd love to find some co-sponsors and introduce would be to say that every congressperson, every senator, and their staff have the exact same health care options as the rest of Americans. That there is no special health care plan for congressmen, senators, and their staff. And I think if we could get that passed, now that would be a tough one. Most of my colleagues would fight that. But if we could get that passed, it would change the debate about health care in this country pretty quick. I'm sorry?
And term limits?
Yeah, term limits, term limits, yes and no. I mean, I'm going to be term limited because I'm just old and I'm not going to be there that long. But term limits have an upside and a downside. I think there's probably better things we can do. I think getting money out of politics and having publicly funded elections, stopping the revolving door where Congress people leave office and take a job paying 10 times as much with the very companies they were supposed to be regulating. If we can pass that kind of legislation, it'll have a much more meaningful impact, I think, than term limits. I'm not against term limits. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that they would do what we hope they would do. I think there's other more important things. I'd like to see a congressional term be 4 years instead of 2. One of the problems with a 2-year term is that you win, and the next day you start raising money for your next election. It just doesn't make sense. Now, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to?
Now, looking at solar power or generators. Right now, you have some tax breaks, not federal, but there's a lot of restrictions and regulations on it. That's what we need to do to ease some of that in this area.
Yeah, he asked about solar power, and by the way, we have the maximum allowable number of panels. We don't have them on our roof. That didn't work, but we have them in one of our fields. And we are covering somewhere between 90 and 100% of our electric use with that. It's been tremendous. What we benefit from, we laid out a fairly good chunk of change, but we benefit from a federal tax deduction. So 1/3 of the cost we got able to get back on our taxes over a couple of years. I think we need to keep and possibly expand those things. That's one step, is not to lose those tax incentives for people who do solar, wind, and renewables. Second thing is that it's more of a state level issue. I'm not sure what the federal government could do, but right now a small number of states allow something called community solar. They do this in Colorado and Vermont and several other places, where you may not have a house, or you might live in an apartment, but you want some of your energy to be coming from solar, but it's not practical to put it on the roof of your apartment complex or whatever. and you may only be able to afford a couple of panels, a small part of your use. But what those states allow is they allow a bunch of people in a neighborhood or a community to come together, find the best site for the maximum solar gain, and together put out a whole bunch of panels. And then that energy feeds back into the grid of that neighborhood. The advantage there is it's cheaper, because when you do it in bulk like that, you get the panels cheaper, you get the installation cheaper, and it allows a middle-class person to buy a whole bunch of panels and a student or a working person to get just a small number of panels. It's really a sensible thing. It's really propelling the solar industry in places like Colorado. Virginia doesn't allow it. Tennessee doesn't allow it.
We don't. I thought BARC has a solar thing where you can actually buy it.
What's BARC?
Bark Electric, BARC. Yeah.
It's a electric
It's co-op.
Well, they may have it through the co-op, but that's not the same as a community-owned at this point, although it might have some of the same advantages as this. The idea behind the community-owned, here you have the utility controlling it still, maybe doing a great job of kind of dictating the terms of it. AEP, which is the utility where we are, they'll only let you put so many panels, they won't let you produce more energy than you need and feed that back to the grid. But I think having the community solar allowed in places like Virginia and Tennessee would propel it. The third thing that's part of all of this is we just have to really, over the next 20 or 30 years, we have to change our electrical grid. Our electrical grid was really built for nuclear, coal, oil, and gas. That's what it was built for very dense fuel that you could store. And if we went to 75% renewables overnight, solar, wind, and whatever, the grid we have, it wouldn't work, because we have to have that stored energy. So we're going to need to come up with new ways. Some of that is battery storage, improving battery storage so that you can actually capture that and keep it. Pikeville, Kentucky, and Pike County, right across from Dickinson County, they're getting a big manufacturer that's producing large batteries for capturing solar energy. I'd love to get a manufacturer like that in Southwest Virginia. But we need better storage, and we need a new kind of grid to also be able to accommodate more solar and wind.
I think what I was looking at is like $100,000 is what it would take to power 73% of the house, and then get like $30,000 back in taxes.
$100,000?
For 60 panels.
It's the same setup on the house.
Yeah, it would be something in the field or
Yeah. Well, ours is a 30 panel system. We just have a somewhat smaller house. We didn't pay anywhere near $50,000. The gross price was about $35,000, which we got back about $12,000.
it's hard to get a lot of information on the best way to do things.
Yeah.
Online,
Are there any local solar installation companies around here? That would help. I mean, we don't have many where we are, but there's two. There's one in Bristol, Tennessee, and one in Washington County. And that helps, because then you can really understand what your options are and all that.
I think it's been a push in the Blacksburg where they installed that's the kind of program they installed a lot of houses there. But get something like that started in your areas that a little bit more accessible.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably some young entrepreneur waiting to start a solar company, a solar installation company, but they want to see that there'll be enough business when they start. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But maybe there's enough customers in the Covington, Clifton Forge area that they could get a successful business. I don't know. I want to allow Meredith a little bit of time for those of you that, I'm not going to assume that everybody here wants me to be elected, but for those of you who do, we have 49 days left.
You all we got. What else is to choose from? Nobody gonna vote more Griffin than that, so you the only thing left standing. I mean, come
That's
on.
not exactly a high recommendation.
Well, we feel you all we got.
So maybe we could, if there's no other burning questions, let me turn it over to Meredith and she'll tell you how we're going to win, what we need from you to win.